So while I believe in shameless plugs whenever I can, this is not just a shameless plug about So Simple software. So Simple Calendar was built on PHP. It was a foundation. The whole foundation of the So Simple Calendar was a JavaScript tool running on PHP, and PHP was querying the server. Over the last year and a half, since FileMaker 16 came out, we started transitioning to the data API. And we're doing it sort of methodically based on what capabilities the data API has. And so that's why I mentioned So Simple Calendars, that a lot of what I'm presenting today was informed by this sort of process we've gone through since the data API came out a year and a half ago. And by the way, if you have used it in FileMaker 16, you have to relearn a lot of it because FileMaker 17 really changed again. The other tool that we have available is called the FM Gateway for Zapier. If you haven't seen Zapier before, how many people have seen Zapier, have used Zapier? It's a really cool automation tool that lets you plug one app on the web into another, send automatic messages when you get payment from PayPal, sort of bridges the gap between a lot of apps. The FM Gateway is a toolkit also built on the data API that turns your FileMaker server into a web service. And so I invite you to check that out as well if you feel like taking a look at that. It's available on our website. And finally, the fmrest.php class file for the FileMaker data API, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we start demonstrating this. Don't leave now, but visit our booth. So who here is developing fairly actively with PHP? Okay, great. And how many of you started working with the data API? Okay, wonderful. How many have actually done the two together, data API and FileMaker PHP? Okay, cool. So we're going to be talking mostly about that nugget right there, because a lot of what I'm finding, and I'm sure you'll find, you might have found already, and you might find going forward, is that a lot of people are in this position of they built a whole vast array of these PHP pages, and now the data API comes out, and they want to know, wow, do I have to switch everything over now to start using the data API instead of CWP, right? And that's a huge nugget if you've been doing a lot of PHP development over the years. So that's something we're going to talk about. So yeah, there's a few sort of areas around that, but mostly we're really talking about what's so great about the data API. Do I want to move to it? What are some good reasons and bad reasons? And then how do I actually start making that transition? So let's talk a little bit about where we were 2 months ago, before there really was a data API. So this is the custom web publishing engine. So the custom web publishing engine is based on an XML API. It's been available since FileMaker 7. And the way it works with FileMaker Server is it posts to a single URL with a bunch of query parameters to exchange its data with FileMaker Server. And FileMaker Server in turn returns these huge XML documents that then we have to parse and go through to get the data that we want. It uses basic authentication, and it builds in the capability for you to actually add your username and password to the URL to bypass that. Please don't do that, and I'm sorry they gave you that capability. But so that's one of the security things around this. This last piece, the FileMaker connections are dynamically created. This is sort of a pet peeve of mine with CWP. How many of you guys have seen, as you're doing your PHP development and you're looking at your admin console to sort of debug what's going on, and suddenly you see like 15, 20, 25, 30 connections start showing up on your admin console? How many of you guys see that? It's a common sight, right? So FileMaker Server works with the CWP engine. It's trying to be really smart, and sometimes it really is. But what it's doing is it's connecting these connections dynamically based on what it feels the needs of the server are. So if you got one connection that's using up that one connection and really sending data and it can't be bothered, it'll open up another connection, perhaps for the same exact user. It'll open up a second connection. And transversely, if you got two users, it might actually share the same connection. So you never really know what those connections are doing, but it does its best to sort of maintain its bandwidth by opening up these multiple connections. So it's a really cool feature, but it's sort of one of my big pet peeves with CWP. So the PHP API is basically a wrapper class. It's been around since FileMaker 9. It wraps up nice and tidy. It's a bunch of functions that wrap up the XML class and lets you query your FileMaker server using PHP functions. There are other tools that do that. FXPHP comes to mind as one of the most popular that was created in this interim between FileMaker 7 and FileMaker 9 before FileMaker released their own. And what it basically gives you is easier control, the ability to access your XML, the data from the FileMaker server without having to learn XML. That's sort of how it works. Then came the data API. The FileMaker data API is analogous to the XML API in that it connects directly to your FileMaker server to retrieve data, right? It doesn't include that PHP component yet. So it's direct access to your FileMaker server. It uses, instead of a single URL, it uses multiple URLs, which I'll describe as I go into this. And it uses JSON instead of XML. And it uses it a little bit more in a standard way because instead of sending everything on the URL string, you embed as much as you can in JSON. So my last bullet point on the last slide and my first bullet point on this slide, you have manageable connections. The best thing with this development. And what that basically means is when you establish a connection, when you ask for a token from FileMaker server and set up your first connection, it gives you a token. You'll see a single connection at the FileMaker server on the console. From that point forward, you will not get another one. And if someone else connects and gets their own token, they'll see one, or you'll see one representing that user, and so on. And so you'll always be able to manage those. The better part, even the cool part about that is that the administrator can knock those users off by disconnecting them, and so can the developer disconnect their connection to manage those connections. They can just say, log me out, and they're disconnected, and that user disappears off admin console. So those manageable connections, just anecdotally, I'll talk a little more about this later when we start talking about speed. I've never run into that thing where sort of the data API stops responding, and that's what's happened with CWP when you start getting these huge lists of connections, is that at some point, once you hit whatever number your magic number is, different servers have different numbers. When you hit that magic number, you start having issues with connecting over CWP. So far, I haven't run into that at all with the data API. And that, I'm assuming, is because it's a new streamlined technology. They are not layering this on top of CWP at all. FileMaker built this up from the ground up to be streamlined. It uses JSON, and it only passes the data that you need. With the CWP engine, you would get a huge amount of data. Every time you ask for something, it would give you all the layout information, all the implementation information about the FileMaker data that you're asking for, and a whole lot more. And it finally uses industry standard methods that, so if someone new coming on board, they can get up and running a little more quickly because they're really standard REST implementation. And it uses token-based security, which is a step up from what we're using now. So the bottom line, it's a more scalable data API, the FileMaker data API. By the way, FileMaker insists that I put FileMaker before the words data API, so I'm trying to. The FileMaker data API is, as a result, really more scalable, more secure, easier to learn, and easier to support. But I will be the first to say, having been doing PHP development for so long, that it does come with a burden for those of us who have been doing that. So first of all, as I said before, there's no standard wrapper class. There are half a dozen companies who have risen to the occasion and created their own wrapper class. And you're looking at the co-founder of one of them. So we have the the FM REST API, fmrest.php API. And I'll talk about a few of those. Regardless of if you're using a wrapper class, chances are you'll have to do some relearning as well. And I'll talk about some of these capabilities that aren't quite the same between the two of them. So the custom web publishing, the main thing, and they talked about this during, I believe it was at the keynote, that the custom web publishing engine includes metadata. And it's really key. In fact, it's one of the reasons why SoSimple hasn't completely embraced data API yet, is because we count on value lists for some of the operations we do. And without that value list, there's some things that we can't do. So whenever we need value lists, we connect over the PHP API still. So that's one thing. Layouts, script information, database information, layout, details, metadata, all of that stuff, value list, all that stuff is not available yet in the data API at all. And honestly, that's the big one. The other two are sort of much smaller. You can run scripts in the data API. You just can't call it by itself. You have to sort of piggyback on top of some other call, like get record or create record or something like that. The CWP had the ability just to run a script and pre-validation of your records before you post them. On the other hand, FileMaker Data API adds a couple of intriguing things. The smallest one it adds is the ability to set global fields. You could kind of do that with CWP. You would do it with scripts. You could run a script that sets a global. I don't know how many people have experienced this, but I've actually gotten crosstalk with that so that some other user might pick up the global I set from one user in PHP. Not familiar? Yeah, so that's sometimes been an issue. But in any case, it's very clean, obviously, in Data API because you have that manageable connections. Everyone's got their own token, so their globals, they're only global. And then the other piece of the container data has been completely rewritten, which is fantastic. You can now have direct access to post your containers right up to, post your images right up to a container field, and you can also retrieve it really, really easy because it's just a URL. I just gave away my big ending. So now that we sort of know those parameters, we sort of look at our options and say, okay, so am I going to stay with the PHP API? Am I going to start considering using this other technology? There's some good reasons, some bad reasons. We can talk about that. For example, if you're going to FileMaker Cloud, if your client says, I got to move to the cloud, to FileMaker Cloud, that doesn't have CWP. So you're sort of forced to say, okay, well, if you're insisting on doing that and you still need these functions, I have to rewrite them in using the data API. And there might be other business reasons that you want to do that. And at some point, we don't really know, right, what sort of next generations of CWP. A lot of people have a lot invested in CWP, so it may stick around for a while. But we also know that FileMaker's putting all their effort really now into the data API when it comes to web publishing. So it's important to consider that aspect of it too. So the next option would be to convert your PHP code. And I'm going to spend some time talking about that. And the final option would be to re-engineer your project. Let's say it's just a client-facing web page or a couple web pages. You might want to just re-engineer it, not even to use PHP anymore. Just use JavaScript and go right to FileMaker server and never even touch PHP. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but that frankly has been covered by at least 2 people today. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that last one. How many people were at Steve Winter's seminar? Yeah, I was in the back room for the end there. I could barely get in. That was an awesome session, but it was crowded. So let's talk a little bit about that last the conversion piece of this, because that's mostly what we're talking about here, right? You've got a whole mess of PHP code. You got to convert it. How are you going to handle that? The first way is you just start digging in. You go looking for your new FileMaker host password calls, and you say, okay, I got to replace that with a curl call. Go through that so you can go start manually rewriting your code to address the data API. So that's one method. The other method, and so that's that way with a lot of code. And then the other method is, and that the subversion of that is, then you start realizing how redundant everything is, and you start creating your own class files and your own functions and all of that. Then the second method is to use someone else's class file. How many people were at the CWP user group meeting? We got a few of those too. Awesome. So yeah, I was there as well. Really a couple great presentations. We're going to talk about Mark's at Driftwood Interactive, his FMPDA tool. There are half a dozen of us. There is a community page that shows you all these different class wrappers. There are compelling reasons to write your own if you really want to do a certain way. There are compelling reasons to take someone else's and rewrite it or edit it to your own specs. And there's compelling reasons just to go whole hog with someone else's class file once you decide this is the one I want to go with. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to spend some time on ours. I'm also going to show you Mark's. But I wanted to mention a couple of others. There's also another one that I'm aware of that's not on the page from, is it Harmonic? Is that the name of the company? Harmonic Data, where are you? Yeah, Harmonic Data also released one called, and I don't remember the name, but it was so cool. What is it? Give it a rest. So there's another one that's very similar to Driftwood Interactive's FMPDA. So I encourage you to take a look at all of these. And that URL, by the way, is a link to a list, that the same list that Rosemary showed at the keynote of all the wrapper classes that are available. Okay, I'm going to get into a demo in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to give you a little background about how REST calls work, because there is a little technical aspect to this session. There's a lot technical aspect to this session. So the first thing you do when you want to set up a REST call is you authenticate yourself. You say, this is my ID. I am Ken Duranzio. This is my password. And it gives you back a token. You take that token, and for every call thereafter, you're going to attach that token to what you're doing, right? It's not unlike getting into your hotel room. In addition to the standard CRUD stuff, C-R-U-D, create, read, update, and delete, FileMaker also allows you to search like global fields and upload containers. So a couple of these are sort of universally understood. So the first one is you go into a web page and you press return. You go to sosimple.com, press return, and you end up at a web page. So that is, how many people have done that? Not necessarily so simple with anyone. Okay, so yeah, so we got 2 people who have gone on the web and typed in an address and pressed return. And, and when you do that, you end up at a web page, and you just did the get method on the web. That's what get means. And sometimes it includes a query string afterwards that gives you, I want to have session ID, you might see appended automatically, or you might actually purposely append stuff. The post method, how many people have, I'm reusing a joke from last year, guys. How many people have gone onto a web page and they filled out a form and they pressed enter after the form? A few more people have submitted forms. Yeah. So when you do that, you're using the post technology. And as web developers, we've probably seen that a lot, where it has form method equals post. Right, we use that a lot. And it's a universally understood thing that if we do that, we're not going to see all these query parameters in our URL. So those are the 2 sort of standard ones. Standard REST technology adds 2 more. It adds patch and it adds delete. And there are a few others too, but for the sake of our conversation, these are the only other 2 that exist. Patch and delete. So these are the methods, and then we have 2 types of URLs. One is called a collection URL, and in FileMaker analogy, that would be, let's say, a list of records. And so a collection URL means a list of something, a group of something. And notice that it ends with a slash. It doesn't necessarily need to, but it ends with sort of this end of a string. And you can get that member's collections. You can post to that to create a new collection. And in some REST implementations, you can delete the entire collection. Then if you add on to the end of that string, to the end of the record, after where it says resources, you add on the ID of that resource. And again, we're talking generic, so far, we're talking generic PHP, a generic REST. We'll take a look at FileMaker's specifics in a second. You add the ID, and now you can address that specific member. So in FileMaker parlance, that would be a specific record. And you can get details about that record, more information usually than you can get with just the collection. Although in FileMaker, I think they're equivalent. I think you actually get the same setback. And then patch is you would use the patch method against the specific record to update a record, and delete to delete it. So I'm going to just zip through the URI. Always use secure. FileMaker doesn't let you do it any other way. If you try to do HTTP, it won't get to the server. Then you put in your FileMaker server name or IP address, the actually fully qualified domain name, so that you're actually using your certificate. FMI/data is the path to the data API v1 is the implementation. We're building our string. Database, followed the word database followed by the name of your database. So the layout, and then, so that identifies your specific layout, and then the records is FileMaker's endpoint for the collection. So this whole string, as it stands, if we put it together, is the collection URL. And so we can get records doing that, or post a new record. If we add on the record ID right after that, we're now addressing a specific record. And that would be your UUID. No, I'm sorry, that would not be your UUID. That would be your get record ID. If you did get record ID in FileMaker, it's the internal record ID of your FileMaker record. So these are your two URLs. So let's redraw this graph. We'll redraw this graph in FileMaker very specific terms. The first URL is to the records, record collection. So these are your FileMaker records. You can do a get or create by posting to that URL. And if you add on the record ID, you can get a specific record. You can edit the record by patching it or delete that specific record. All of this stuff, well, actually, I'll show that in just a sec. All this stuff is on your server at that URL. If you type in your server name followed by FMI/API data/API doc, that will actually give you the same thing we're talking about. And you'll see very similar information. So let me get into some details. Okay, so what we have here is a bunch of pages that I set up. And these all live on this machine. Everything's on this machine, except for some speed stuff I'll show you at the end. And so this is the way we're doing it now. So this is our legacy folder. I'm looking at the first page. And legacy is the way we're doing now. So what we do is we go in and we say new FileMaker. And we want to create a record. So we press the create record button. We check to see if the actions create record just from this specific page. And I do FM using the FM, after I set up the new FileMaker, FM add new command layout. I should obviously say that part. We had to include the FileMaker PHP class file first. Then we do all that stuff. So we do new add command, and we do set field, and then we do new record execute. And so when we do that, we go to the legacy page. I'm going to just do a create record. And I'm going to do create record. Before I do that, I'm going to open up my FileMaker file. That's open. We have 79 records. I'm just going to go into my console here. I have a couple blank console windows. So I'm going to submit that. And with any luck, we got a result object, which means it didn't fail. I'm not doing anything fancy like showing you the records. It's really just a technical demo. But what it did in the WPE log is it submitted this URL. It did two URLs, but you can see that it submitted on your behalf an XML URL. It's an FM result set XML followed by your file name and your layout and even your criteria that you want to add to your database. Ken was the first field it added and last was blank, and that's what it submitted. And indeed, we now have 79 records, oops, then we have 80 records, and I did mistype it after all, but it created the 80th record, right? So that's what we're doing now. The first thing I want to show is this FMPDA thing, because it is really cool. Wait a minute, I got to show you the code first, because that's the cool part. So FMPDA, I changed 3 things. This is exactly the same file. I went into this file and I did include once, fmpda.php. I made sure that I am actually addressing this to a secure server. I did actually change that. And the only other thing that I changed, I said new FMPDA instead of new FileMaker. It took the same parameters, takes everything else the same. I did new record, FM, new add command. I didn't change any of that. It's all identical. I go back here, I'm going to fill out the form, and over rest this time. And now when I submit this, what you're going to see is it doesn't work. Nope, I got the record. It worked. Oh, I did not have 80 before? No, I don't see the, I don't, didn't I fill in my last name? I did. Let me see what I did with the code here. That's the right URL. Created the record. Let me check my log. I actually can tell it worked. I got record number 82. I think it's my connection on FileMaker's server. This is record number 81. I think it's the connection to this. So I'm going to tell you all something, just my experience doing this demo, is that you don't ever really want to do a demo. There you go. You never actually want to do a demo where a server is running on the same machine as FileMaker Pro. And I'm learning this the hard way. We've been adapting our entire booth space downstairs as a result of that. But that's what's going on here. So there we go. It finally did show up in FileMaker, but we saw it here first. We saw that it did actually create these sessions. I want to show you what happened though, right? So there were no added sessions to the CWP side. It didn't touch CWP. It went in, and the first thing it did was it posted to records. This is actually kind of something cool that it did, right? Posted to records. I can tell it did a post, and it went to records, and it was trying to create that new record, but it got an error. And then the error was a 952. That means it's not logged in. There's no valid token. So then it said, oh, okay, so I'll post then to sessions. That's my login URL. And then it got back a token, and it posted again to records. And then in order to be the same, to have the same behavior that the CWP engine does, it finally did a get on that record ID to get that record back. So it did those 4 steps. And now what's cool is when I do, So now if I did another one, I'm going to fill that in so I know it's filled in. Create record, submit. Now when I fill that in, and I go to the console again, it did the post to record and then record 83. It didn't have to go get that login key again. And that's a key part of what's going on here, and I'll show you how that works when I get to the manual version, which is now. So that is a really cool library, and like I said, Harmonic Data is also doing something similar that allows you to really drop in a whole new, drop in this class file, and it basically takes over all the functions that you gave to FileMaker, to the FileMaker class and the class file, and redirects them to the data API. And for many things, that'll work great for your project. In my opinion, it's a great stepping stone. You'll probably want to re-engineer it at some point. But if it works for you, it's a great way to sort of get over that hurdle of, right, my client's moving to cloud, and I need to use the data API. So how do I start doing that? And this will do that. So that's a really cool tool. So at some point, you're going to want to re-engineer that. At some point, you're going to want to start taking advantage of the specific features of the data API, because they're not the same. The data API has unique features. You're not going to want to burden it with getting back all the data if you don't need all the data. So why don't you just write directly to the record, make sure you created it properly, but you don't necessarily want to get the record back. So things like that, you're going to start seeing, yeah, I really want to optimize it, so maybe a drop-in class isn't the way to go. Maybe I want to start building it out myself. So this is basically what it takes to build it yourself. So there is no include anymore, right? Because I'm going to write it myself. So the first thing I do is I go and I build a URL, which is, we talked about before, that's what the URL looks like. And this is actually the sessions URL. I'm going to log in with that URL. And then I do my curl init. What curl init does is instantiate curl, which is the technology we're going to use to post to the URL and get information back. You set up a bunch of options for that. In this case, I'm not verifying my SSL, but you want to do that. You want to verify your certificates. In this case, because I'm on a local file here, I couldn't do that. For your authentication, you set up, and all this stuff is in that documentation I showed you, how you want to configure your headers. And you set up a blank post fields, just an empty JSON array, and a custom request of post. And the only reason I use that particular command is because it's easy to change when you have other custom post types like delete or patch. So I use that function instead of the more general one. And then you just do curl exec. And that's how you do it manually. And so then I get a little bit of error information, get the results back, and before I actually finish the function, let's just see how much that does. I'm going to go back to the console. I'm going to clear this out so it's clear what we're looking at. I don't really need this one anymore either. And I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to, again, I know we're keeping pretty simple. I'm just going to create another record. I'm not doing FMPDA. I'm going to curl manual. I'm going to create another record. I'm doing a lot of Ken records. Yeah, start thinking of other names. Think outside the box. All right, create record. I'm going to submit that. And all I did was, in that last key, I forgot to show you what that actually was. All I did was I did a print result and then close my page. Because I wanted to show you actually what you're getting back from server. And what you're getting back from server is this string with your token. So its response is the record, and then inside there is a token. And this is what we need to continue making the rest of our calls. So then what I'll do is I'll take that token. I'll take that token here, and I grab it from token result array response token. And I'll run a very similar request. You'll see the exact same stuff again. I'm going to grab the first and last records. I'm going to come back to this section in just a second. But I'm going to set up my URL. This time, I'm going all the way to the records, right? We talked about that one. And I'm going to post to the record. Only this time, I'm going to, instead of having the authorization username and password, I'm going to make a bearer token that says, that's just bearer space and the token number. And this again, is in the, it's in the documentation how to do all of that, but it's great to sort of see the context around it. So I'm going to post that, and before I do, let's see what happened here. So this was the sessions one that I just did a second ago. And now I just want to post to that. Let's go to here, back to the manual coding. Oh, I just can't think outside the box here. DevCon 2018. I don't know. Someone's got to feed me some data to put in here. And submit. OK. So I got my token up there, and then I submitted the data. And then down here, I get my response array. I created record number 84. And what happened in the console is this was a session I did before. I created a session before. I just created a new session. And I posted my record. I did a post to my record. So the reason I'm pointing this out is because there was nothing in my code that said, if I have a token, then reuse it. So what happens as a result is that I ended up creating, and I'm going to go into my admin console to show this. And I'm going to look at my database, and I'm going to see, I've been identifying them by name. The username is the name of the technology I'm using. So the manual curl engine now has 2 sessions. And if I were to do it again, you'd see a third. A third, there it is. And now you have 3 of them. So, this is now going to run into the same problem we had with the PHP thing. We're going to have runaway sessions. But the design of this is that we don't need to do that. The design is that we can now capture that token, use that token for all future calls, and never repeat it. So what we'd have to do with that curl functionality is we'd have to say up here before we even issue it, we'd probably do something like Mark did with the FMPDA code, is we'd probably say, if there's already a token, or let's try to do the post and see if we get an error. And if there's an error of 952, which means that there was no token, then get the token and go do it again, right? So you need some kind of logic in here. And you can also see, obviously, that this code gets really redundant real fast. So probably at very least, if you're rolling your own, you probably want to have a curl function that does all that part for you, and you just feed it the stuff you want to send. So that's the roll your own version. So let me step into ours. So our REST engine, our fmrest.php class file, is a really simple class file. And I'm not I'm actually not petitioning that everybody use it, honestly. It's a great, I think we use it. We use it for So Simple. We use it for our clients so far as we're rolling them over. We've been using it a lot. It works great for our purposes because I like to keep some of so I'll tell you what it is, what's great about it. What's great about it is that the way we set it up is the function calls themselves. You see create record is a function, delete record, takes very minimal parameters, edit record's a function. And if you look at the documentation, you're going to see the exact same thing: create, delete, edit, get single record, get multiple records, upload into container field. Those are reflected exactly as the data API defined them, so that it's easy to step in here and sort of see how we did things and how it works, and easy to edit it if you want to edit it. So this is an excellent class file for sort of digging into the data API and seeing how it integrates with PHP. I will say that we also do the token caching. So we will check to see if there's a token. We'll use it if there is. We'll reconnect you if there isn't. So we manage all of that as well. So you don't have to say log in first. You can actually just say create record, and we'll take care of the logging in. So I'll show you what the equivalent code for this looks like using the data API. So this is the client file, same exact code. Instead of including FileMaker, we're including fmrest.php. That's our class file. We're doing new fmrest, looks very similar. This is where it's a little bit different. And I promise you I'd dig into this in a second. But whoops, I'm in the wrong file. I'm in options. Let me go here to the simpler one. Right, okay, so include fmrest, new fmrest, create record, and it did that little dance to create the record. And then all it does is run one single command that says, if you can read it in there, result equals fm, create record, and encapsulate the data. So that one command is all we use to create your record, and that goes on, it logs in, goes and creates the record, and comes back. And we do that for all of them, right? So all you need is the record ID to delete, so result is fm, delete record, record ID, and if you have additional data, we can pass that as well. And additional data in that example might be a script you want to run when you do the deletion. So the way this is, so let me run that first, and then I'll show you how that's set up. So there's the fmrest class file. Same thing, fmrest.php is the class file. And create. And before I do this, let me go here, clear this out, submit it. You see down here, it gave me record ID 86 was created. And this, by the way, comes right out of the FileMaker data API. It's unmodified. And that way, part of the goal of this class file is that it uses, it's so structured right up against the data API. It passes back exactly what they created. It's not trying to enhance it. It's really just trying to mimic it in PHP. So another advantage to that is that later on, you might want to use JavaScript. It's going to be much easier to start writing the stuff in JavaScript because the terminology you're using is going to be identical. And so what that created, same deal. It created a session because there was no token. It went to the session, and then it posted the record. It didn't try to retrieve the records because I didn't ask it to. And so that record, hopefully it was created. Create again. Nope, is that it? 83, I think it was 84 I was waiting for. Nope, it's catching up. There you go. Created that record. So yeah, I really invite you to dig into that class file, but I also really encourage you to look at other class files because some of them add a lot of tools that are useful that work similarly to the way the FMPHP class file works, that you can create records and queries automatically. So I will also just touch on this because I said I would. How we set up the data that we're sending. So that section there. So basically what we're doing is we're saying, okay, I need to create a record with my first name and my last name and the value. And the reason I need that is because I need to send it, that's the way the data API is expecting it. And I need to put that inside another data point called field data, because that's what the data API is expecting. And so if I look at my response, at the code that I sent it, this is my file, get array. I should have debug code down here. There we go. Here's my payload. And so my payload looks like this. It's an array that has field data, first, last, and when it gets translated, it turns into something almost identical to that. And where that comes from is create record, request example, just like that, right? Just like they show in the documentation. Now, one of the advantages of tying directly to that structure is that when FileMaker added scripts to it, we didn't have to modify our code much because you can pass the script the same way. And so you would add, instead of just the field data element on that record, you would add these script, you would add the portal data, and you start adding these other options. And I will invite you to explore this file later on. There is one other option file, and that's this one here, that we dressed up the same exact thing, but because we started getting overwhelmed with all the options that you have in Data API, we don't show the fields that you have access to until you choose a function. So this is a create record, and it uses the first and last field to create the record in our particular script. But you can also send these parameters, script with a script parameter, pre-request script with a pre-request script parameter. So you can now start running these other scripts when you post your stuff. You can also create portal data, which is kind of cool. What I really wanted to show you, though, and you can also set globals directly with set global field. But what I really wanted to show you was this upload thing. So the upload thing's really cool. The upload thing is very little code. Let's pull that code up. Let's write to record ID 1. And we're just going to submit that. I'll show you the result first. It uploaded photo to record number 1. So it's done separately from creating the record. And if we look at that, and we go back to record number 1, and it refreshes eventually. Hello. Records refresh. Let's see if it knows how. Yeah, that's just annoying. It told me it did. Let's make sure we actually got a solid result. Yep, modified. Okay. So it definitely did. It's just not showing up yet. Unless, oh, wait, there it goes. Boy, yeah, I apologize for that. This really is FileMaker catching up. The data API was really zippy, and so it's really kind of a drag to show you this demo that when FileMaker is sort of lagging because of this thing that I'm running server on the same machine. And it's all a result of that. But that came up now. And then so that was a fairly simple operation. What's even simpler, though, is if I want to show that result, let's do get record ID 1, and I choose submit. This is the really cool one. I'm not going to show you that yet. Let me show you. So I go in here and I do get record, and I want to display that record. Let's do display. Oh, this is not options, sorry. Options. Display. And I'm doing get record. Get record. There's my get record function. And at the end of the get record string, I'm going to show a display stuff. And this is the cool thing. So it says photo, image source equals field data. And this is how I retrieve any data from the data API. I just include field data photo, and that gives me the URL. So I'm going to submit that now. And there's my GIF coming from FileMaker. Right, that's pretty cool. It's so easy, and all that's doing is giving me the photo here comes in as a stream. That's the whole record. So real quickly, the JavaScript thing, I'm not going to show it because, like I said, it's been shown in so many other places. I just created a new record using JavaScript. It didn't even submit the form, went right to FileMaker server, and I created another record there. Well, it would have. So I also have a bunch of speed tests. I'm not going to run them all. I'm just going to run this a micro create one. Because the bottom line is, there wasn't a huge speed difference to write home about. I did want to do the test just to be able to show you. CWP actually was neck and neck, and in many cases, beat out the data API in retrieving records. These are small records. They're not real good test sets. They're only a couple little fields. But even with some bigger data sets, I did a big read here where I just grabbed 10,000 records off the system, and it took a second quicker to pull it up from data, not even a second, a split second quicker. By and large, they're very, very similar. I wouldn't do it just for speed, but I would say that the technology is more stable and more scalable because of that because of the connection management with FM data. So don't expect great speed improvements, but I would expect a lot more stability and scalability. So before I wrap up, I just want to do one more thing. I discovered something as I was doing this demo that was really neat. So this is the exact same form I had before. I just removed everything else except for the upload container. But what I discovered that was really cool is actually a JavaScript technique or actually an HTML5 technique, not even JavaScript. That I really loved, and that is so this is a standard input file type, lets you choose a file. But what's really neat about it is that I added this accept image slide. I don't know if you can see that. I just added a little string to my normal input file type of file that says image / star, so it's any image type, capture equals camera, and that's an HTML5 code. And what it allowed me to do, and unfortunately I didn't have time to connect this because, like I said, I sort of discovered that last minute, is that it allows me to go on my phone and let me just go connect to a more public server than this little local server. And I can go in here and I can say I want to use the camera as input. And it's kind of cool if it actually works. I love doing live demo. I really did this once, like a little quick test. So I really kind of hope it works. And I apologize to Steve Winters because he actually did the same thing a few sessions ago. And he had a really much slicker looking interface and all that than I did and was able to demo this. But really, I was going to show this anyway. It's not because I saw his demo, but it really was cool. I can take this whole picture, and this is going to be a view. And it should just pop right in here after I click submit, right? So I'm going to use this. You're not seeing my interface, but I grab that, and I can post this image and remember it for posterity because now it's stored in my... Did you guys sign a release for this? I don't think so. And there's your image, right? Right, so you could download those. Really, the whole purpose of this was to be able to sort of give you an overview of what the technology provides, how you want to transition, what your options are. I hope I've accomplished that, and I would like to take questions. If anybody has any questions, please come to the microphone, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
So yes. So there isn't, in the custom web publishing, there was a lot of, whenever I was doing PHP integration, I would be able to leverage value lists inside of FileMaker. So if a client had a value list that they were maintaining, custom static values, I would be able to leverage that through the custom web publishing. There doesn't appear to be anything like that in the REST API.
You know what, there is nothing like that, but there are a lot of ways to sort of accomplish different tasks. Mm-hmm. There is actually a new feature that I didn't mention. I mentioned it, but I didn't mention the specific part of it. It's really kind of cool. When you do a script in FileMaker,
Yeah.
you can actually spit back the results from that script when you say exit script and you give a result.
Okay, so you
That'll
can
come
use the
back with
value list
API.
items.
So you can grab it like that, for example. Yeah. So
Okay.
there are different ways of doing it.
All right, that's a good
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
As far as the difference between custom web publishing and using the API, isn't custom web publishing basically free to use and FileMaker charges us to use the API?
I missed the end of that. So they charge for the data API?
Yes.
Yes, they do.
And I'm wondering, I was looking at the numbers that they charge.
Yeah.
And if you've got a very active web page, in a matter of hours, you could eat up a year's worth of data. And just doesn't sound very practical.
Yeah. I would. So I think the jury's out on that. I think it's a good question, and I think time will tell. But I think it does change how you design your websites and how much data. You're only paying for one direction. You're only paying, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's submitting data, correct?
No, you're paying for pulling data
You're going
out.
to pull the data out. Okay.
Yeah, and that's
So you
going
can-
to be a real
Right,
bummer.
Right, because if I'm pulling lists of data and then you're sorting through them, you're pulling a particular record, that you're paying for all of that. That's accurate. So that's a good consideration, and the best I could say is track your data and see how you're doing it. From what I've seen so far, and again, I work mostly with microdata, not huge amounts of data. What I've seen is that it's fairly negligible, and we're not going to eat up the data right away. But again, I'm working with a lot of microdata, not big chunks and big lists and stuff like that. So I hope that helps.
I haven't read the documentation on this. I have just a question about getting container data in the new API. Can you get container data directly, or is it sort of get container data URL only now?
It's a URL, and when you grab that URL, it streams the data to you. So the first step is get container data, or get the record, and the record includes that field with a stream to that container data. Then you use that URL however you want to, whether it's JavaScript or PHP, to then retrieve it and do something with it. In my example, I just used it as an image thing because I knew it was going to be an image. But I could also have downloaded it and done something with it.
I just haven't got that to work in the previous PHP API, that's all. So
The PHP API, the CWP.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was difficult. It was difficult with that. With the new version, with this data API, it's easy.
It just works.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really easy.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
What about mixing CWP and data API in the same web page or same?
Yeah, you absolutely can. I recommend clean code, but other than that, yeah. And I mean, we actually do
so
that.
So you could get the value list in one of them.
Absolutely, and we're doing that with our calendar. What we do is the first time you draw your calendar, we need to get your value list information, so that we use FileMaker PHP API to do that. If you've set up the data API, every subsequent call after that will use the data API because we don't need the value list anymore. We can get in there quick, get out, disconnect your session if you want to, so we have a lot more control.
And then the CWP has the problem you're talking about is with web publishing engine. This isn't using that, is that?
It's not using the custom web publishing engine. It's completely built from the ground up using a separate set of code. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, sir.
To use the data API, to fire a script, it has to be part of a payload, correct?
Correct.
And is it fired after the other payload event happens? So, for example, if the first part is to create a record, is the script always after that, or can you have a script fire before?
So there are 3 places you can put it, and I thinking about it, I think all 3 of them come after the payload. Mm-hmm. So you do the payload first, you do the whatever function call you did first, and then there are 3 of them that run in sequence. One is pre-request. I have to look. I don't think it's pre-query. I think it's pre. I have to double check that. If I go to. Right. So the three sections are So the pre-request script. So the script which runs after everything, the pre-request script, which sounds to me, honestly, and I just haven't run that. The pre-request script, I believe, would run then before the query, but I'd have to double check that.
Oh.
And then there's the pre-sort, which is after you get the query back, but before you sort it.
Thank you.
Anybody contradict that? I want to make sure I got that right and I give misinformation. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, wonderful. Thank you guys so much. You've been a great audience, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.